My attitude is when I write is I want to challenge myself. I want to take big swings and do things I've never done before and do things I've never seen before. One of the reasons why they had skipped over Benjamin and done Janeway was because they didn't know the approach that they wanted to do. They were like, well, he's in the wormhole. How are we going to do his autobiography? It's a father talking to his son. And in that, it becomes autobiographical. Starfleet wants the captain back. Bajor wants the emissary back. He's like, I just want my dad.
I would like the ship to go. Now.
Hello everyone, welcome to Discussing Trek, and today we have Derek Tyler Attico, a speculative fiction writer, essayist, photographer. Derek is well known for his contributions to the Star Trek literature, as we well know on this show as we've been reviewing the Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko, which we love. He is a two-time winner of the Star Trek Strange New Worlds short story contest with the story Alpha and Omega, and also The Dream and the Dreamer, which we definitely have to get into because he took me one level deeper with the mind with the mind flip. He took me one level deeper with Inception, so we got to talk about that.
Yes.
But yeah, we are so delighted and happy to have Derek with us today. Derek, how are you doing, man?
Clarence, Jonathan, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your show on Discussing Trek. First of all, I'll just say that I love your podcast. I love the idea of it, Discussing Trek, which is great, which is what we all do when we're not watching Trek, right? We discuss it. And then, I don't know, a year ago, maybe more than a year ago, somebody said somebody's doing like a close read of your book. I'm like, what? And it was like, yeah, they're reviewing chapter by chapter. I was like, no. And so I checked out the first YouTube episode. You guys were like, we're going chapter by chapter and we're going to review this book. And I was like, oh man, this better hold up. Because it's chapter by chapter. And by that time I had gotten great reviews, thankfully. But to have you guys go through it chapter by chapter is an honor. So thank you for having me. Thank you for having me here on your show.
Yeah, your book definitely comes with a awesome pedigree of short stories that I didn't even know existed until after reading the book. But they also have definitely drawn me in. So I want to kind of go back and kind of discuss your roots in Star Trek. How did you get in the Trek? And then we'll get into how you got into writing and writing for Star Trek. But let's just start with how you got into Star Trek itself.
Oh, man. Well, I was probably like 5, 6 years old, maybe 7. And this will probably date myself. My dad used to fix televisions. When we used to, there was a time when we used to have people fix them and not just throw them out and buy a new one, right?
Yes.
Nuts, right? Yes. And I remember like this one day he's fixing the TV and the back is off and it has actual tubes and stuff. And he had it on, which I don't even understand why he would be working on something while it was on, but it was on. Okay, which is nuts in itself. And on the screen was this dude in a blue shirt with these pointy ears, and he was like in pain, and he was talking to this. He was like merging with this creature, and I was like, I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. It's like, what is this? And find out it was original series Star Trek. It was the episode Devil in the Dark, and it was a scene when Spock mind melds with the Horta, And I was in, man. I was all in, because that was different. It was new, and so I started watching Star Trek, and then my parents, especially my mom, encouraged it. And I found out a lot of the values that my mom was teaching me, I was seeing on Star Trek. Treat everybody with respect and equality, try and do the right thing, have some kind of morality, in what you do,
Yes.
And so it was a great time for me because, as a kid, your parents are doing this in your ear.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, I don't know if that's the thing that I want to do. But then you see it on television and you see these people that all look different and they're all, working towards a common goal. So I was all in. And that's how I got into Star Trek.
Well, but let me just say my interest into Star Trek was a little less admirable.
Okay.
I saw Miss Deanna Troi in the suit, and I was like, "Oh,
okay,
that works." No, but definitely those ideas of values and teamwork and togetherness this utopian future, as all things we definitely love from Star Trek as well. So how did that lead you into writing?
Before that, I want to know what Jonathan's first introduction to Star Trek was.
I lived with my aunt at the time. There were certain days she would always watch Star Trek The Next Generation. I never knew what that was about. I just know I would get home from school and it would be on. And, you know, in most young black kids' homes, like whatever parents are watching, you're going to watch. You don't have to stream. If you want to watch TV, this is what we're watching.
Right.
So I sit down and I started watching. So my introduction was Captain Picard and Riker. Now, I'll tell you what got me. I don't remember what episode it was, but I was watching Data, and it was something he was doing, superhuman strength. He threw something. I was like, what is that? Who is that? Is that a superhero? And she's like, no, he's an android. I was like, what's an android? So, and from that point, I watched the show only to see Data because I was so intrigued about Data.
Wow.
Right. And then, of course, as you watch, because Star Trek is what it is, and you start getting that, you know, hey, different people can work together. Different people can come from different backgrounds and be part of something. Hey, there is something out there we can reach toward. There's more in the world than what we see now. And you can dream about it. Goes back to like your book, Dream and the Dreamer. Like there's dreams that we can go for. We may not get there, but Star Trek tells us we can.
Right.
That's kind of my long-winded way of saying.
That's dope. That's dope. I mean, I'm glad that I know it's your show, but I'm sorry, but I asked the question. I wanted to know. So in regards to how I got to writing for Trek, I was a TOS fan, original series fan. Next Gen, if I'm gonna be really honest with you guys, you know, I'm not gonna say, oh, I loved it. I was like, because first season didn't do a lot for me, you know. Mm-hmm. And I watched that episode Code of Honor, which is like, you know, horrible episode. And so I was pretty much turned off on Next Gen. And DS9 I liked, and I kind of liked like stuff like after like third season Next Gen was good. And a friend of mine at the time said, you know, they're doing this thing, like a contest every year, an anthology series. Do I have it here? I don't have it here. An anthology series where you write a story and you turn it in, and you know it's a contest. If your story gets accepted, it goes into this anthology called Strange New Worlds, and they pick like 10 or 12 a year. You know, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Star Trek, you know, and I had already been writing, but not writing professionally, just writing. You know, I won an award in high school from the Dramas Guild of America for writing a screenplay. Actually, it was a Star Wars screenplay I wrote. And I won an award. They picked 12 out of 12,000 kids across the country.
Wow.
And so I won that, but I wasn't really doing anything professionally. And I knew I wanted to get to writing, but I didn't really know what or how. And I was like, okay, let me write a short story for Star Trek. And I'm gonna write the one I want to write. I don't care what's, you know, I'm gonna write what I want to write. So I wrote Alpha and Omega, and it got in. And I remember I got the phone call. They were like, your story got in. And I was like, wow. I said, and it took first place.
Wow.
And I was like, what? You know,
wow.
So that was Alpha and Omega. And I hadn't been writing for a while. You know, it had been a couple of years. And what I did, because I believe in research. So I was like, you know what, let me go back and watch all of Next Gen, you know. And in watching all of Next Gen, I realized that Next Gen is just as honorable, just as good as original series as all of Trek. And that Roddenberry was trying to do some, you know, Mr. Gene Roddenberry was trying to do some different things with, of course, Next Gen. But you don't want to repeat yourself, you know. And I kind of like fell in love with Next Gen. And then I was like, okay, so then that is how I came up with the idea for that story, Alpha and Omega, because it's a next TNG Voyager story, but it also has the original series on the back end of it, you know? So I was like, you know, if it gets in, it gets in. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'll just write what I want to write. And I was lucky that got in.
Yeah, let me just say on Alpha and Omega, you do such a great job of capturing the voices of the characters. because as I read I'm a Voyager stan myself, and as I read Captain Janeway with these lines and talking about the coffee versus the tea, I'm this is right on point. You're right in there with it, and that's something I can always appreciate when you can capture the voice of a character, and in your head as you're reading, you're like saying it back in your head. So I really, really love that. And I will say I do appreciate in these short stories, it seems like we get more of the dialogue from the characters that are around the time that we remember in it. So I felt a familiarity with those that, that just made me, just sucked me in a little bit with. So I really appreciate that. And also, I want to talk about The Dream and the Dreamer, but Alpha and Omega is equally as mind shattering as I'm still not sure I understand it completely. My mind is blown.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, the jump to the future and the resetting of life itself, I guess, is kind of mind shattering in that story as well.
So how much thought, this is kind of a sidetrack, but I'm just curious, when you were planning that or writing that and you're kind of getting to these part where you're going to kind of, I will say jump time, but just make, how much thought did you go into to put that together? Like, did that just come to you, or was it like a first reaction? Did you kind of plan it, or how?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to write a story that I would like, and I was like, I don't think a lot of people are going to like this story because, I destroyed the entire Star Trek universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think if my attitude is when I write is I want to challenge myself. I want to take big swings and do things I've never done before and do things I've never seen before, and I'd never seen that in Star Trek, and, Borg basically win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spoiler. I guess we won't say how, but they basically win in that story.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I think it's like 10,000 years later.
Yeah, 10,000. Yeah.
Right? It's like 10,000 years later. And I did a lot of research for that because even before that, like, the Borg supercube was 500 million drones. And it's half the size of the moon orbiting Earth. So I spoke to ex-NASA scientist, and he helped me with the math to figure out, like, where the supercube would be, because if the supercube is hovering over Earth, then it's going to create, mass floods and just from its gravitational pull, because it's now literally a smaller moon than the moon. It's half the size of the moon. So I did all that hard science that's in
awesome.
there just so that I just wanted to do that,
That's awesome.
And then I was like, well, who could take out the Borg? And I was like, V'ger. That's kind of dope. V'ger, right? Because, and then I read somewhere that there was speculation that Gene Roddenberry was playing around with the idea of like the Borg early when he was thinking about when they were doing Star Trek the Motion Picture. And I was like, I can bridge that,
Yeah, beautiful tie-in.
Yeah. And it feels organic, right?
It does. It does.
And so V just comes back and ultimately saves humanity, so.
And that's another thing I found about your writing. It brings out something in me that makes me want to go back and watch or find reference material and see to tie the pieces together. And and that's one of the things I really, really love. The Dream and the Dreamer. Oh my God. You say as you've watched, we've talked about the inception of Ben writing his letter to Jake, who you're writing the voice of Jake in his book. But lo and behold, this entire time, there's been another level of inception on it that it blew me away. Blew me away. I do want to ask this as well. Did you think about maybe including more parts of The Dream and the Dreamer in the Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko? Because it seems like it's like a sister piece to it. It just goes so well together and flows directly into it.
That's a great question. I remember the way I got the gig for the autobiography is that the people at Titan had read The Dreamer and the Dream. They'd read that, and they're like, oh, he'd be a good fit for the Sisko autobiography, because someone on Twitter at the time said, oh, this guy Attico wrote this really cool DS9 short story, he'd be a good fit. And then they read that, and then they went and read the thing. So I remember talking to the editor, a managing editor for Titan, George Sanderson. And he was like, I really loved what you did with Dream in a Dream, but that's too out there. You got to bring it in. Because the Dream in a Dream takes some bold swings, man. It
does, man. It does.
And my attitude for writing that was, well, it was for the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and they were bringing back the Star Trek Strange New Worlds contest. So I was like, I felt like I had to do better, or at least top what I did in Alpha and Omega, and push as far as I could push it, imagination and writing and all that. And I just, it's a nuts story. When you think of, it's a lot of, and again, I'm trying to challenge myself because it's a story within a story within a story, and to write that and then to make that easily readable and accessible and understandable to anyone that picks it up. That's the difficult part, And I think I did that, but that,
you did
that
a great
was
job.
What was, thank you. But that was what was crazy about that. But they told me that you gotta pull back. You can't go that crazy for the autobiography. But then I realized with the autobiography there was ways to do things that I could touch on things. And then when we were doing the art for the autobiography, there's this picture in the book which is like of a shout out to the other two stories. It's in there. It's like a shout out. If you look in the art, right? We were playing around. So in the Incredible Tales cover, right?
Oh yes.
So Alpha and Omega by Derek T. Attico, right?
Yes.
And then Deep Space Nine Epilogue by Benny Russell. Now, Epilogue is the story that Benny is writing in Dream in the Dream. So that's it's like a trilogy. It's like a trilogy.
Oh man,
that's cool.
And we're going to get into the book, but I have to say, as much as Far Beyond the Stars kind of blew my brain with this concept of the dream, the dreamer, what's real, is Benny real, is Benjamin real, and we're going back and forth with that. We get the reflection in the glass at the end of the episode, and your story manages to take that. And even in the book, in the last chapter of the book, we get the date. That's the date of the release of Deep Space Nine in the book. But in the short story, you take that to a whole nother level. Once again, you're trying to destroy the universe.
Right. And bring the cop back, who nobody likes, right? But he's a great villain. Yeah.
And just so beautiful played out. We get to see Ben's son in the short story, and he's possessed by the spirit of the pirate in the Ducat, and there's all types of shenanigans going on. And then how you. And I know people want to read this, but I just have to mention the mind twist of thinking, no, you're wrong. One is they're both real. They're both real. The writing makes it real. Right. And we get this crescendo at the end where he's writing and it's becoming in a reality. And they've bandaged. Well, did they break it? They broke his hands. And they're trying everything they can to keep him from getting his story out. And I know that has to resonate with you as a writer, and having all these ideas in your brain and getting them out and trying to get them published and all the other shenanigans that go along with being a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, Dream in a Dream was very personal. It's a black man in the 1950s that can't get published. Not because he's not a good writer. It's the opposite. It's because he's such a good writer, and no one wants to believe that a black man can write that, And I'd be lying if I said I haven't had my own obstacles, as a black author. And here was an opportunity to contribute to the Star Trek universe, contribute to the DS9 Benny Russell story, and try to personalize and personify, through some of my things through Benny, And he's been 10 years. We find him. He's 10 years in the asylum, man, and they won't let him go because he won't stop writing. He won't let go of his craft. So basically, it's saying, let go of your dreams, and you could be free. But is that freedom, right?
No.
So he won't let go of his dreams. He's still writing, you know, and then we find out who his therapist is, and, you know, so it's...
See,
So
now,
crazy.
that was the most, I had to go back and read that like 3 times. Cause like, wait. Did that just happen? Like
Right.
Are we in a dream again? Is this another dream? Is this somebody else's dream? Is this his story that he's writing? Like, what's going on? I think from that point on, like, I think I told Clarence earlier, it's like, I feel like I need to go read the book, read the autobiography again, and watch through DS9 again, then come back and read the short story, just so I can wrap my brain around it.
Yeah.
So, and if you've listened to any of our podcasts that I've been on, I always, the timey-wimey, as Kyle would say.
Yes, what you're just saying, yes.
I have an issue, like I can't get my brain to get it right. So, but it's still, you did it so well that I don't even care if I do or not. Like, and that's usually when, sometimes people will do things with like trying to jump time or, you know, and it's just not done well. And it kind of leaves you like, if you don't 100% understand it, you don't appreciate it.
Right.
Whereas this short story, whether or not I can place the time in the right place, like I still appreciated the message and the story and just the characters involved in it. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a story that that was a big deal for me because, you know, and I think that was the first time I'd be really professionally, it was the first time that I'd written a story dealing with, on that level, dealing with race, I always try and put morality, you know, in something I write, but it was dealing with race and it was like head on. It wasn't like some kind of analogy or parallel. It was head on. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it and see what happened. And it got in. So I was really, I'm proud of that story. I'm really proud of Alpha and Omega. And I'm proud of the fact that I didn't silence myself and be like, oh, I don't know if this could be, I did it. And then, you know, it got in. So I'm proud of that. Yeah.
So speaking of framing devices, let's get into the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko. What led you to this conclusion of this framing device of having Benjamin come through send a message through the wormhole and have Jake write his story?
First I'd say that Dreaming the Dream was, you know, in the back of my head the whole time. I was like, oh, you know, you can't do anything that you did in Dreaming the Dream, because then it starts to feel like you're copying yourself, you know? Mm-hmm. So you got to kind of be different. And I just relied on I think what writers do. We rely on what we know and ourselves and our history and our past. And I was raised Baptist, you know, and my mom made sure, like 5 years old, I was reading like Shakespeare and wow, Greek mythology, and you know, I was in fourth grade with college level reading, you know. So wow, there's a lot of stuff that I already knew, and I was like, wait a minute. It's not unusual in human history for the gods or God, right, to speak to man from someplace, you know. Examples of the burning bush, of Moses, you know, of Zeus on Mount Olympus, you know. So once I started thinking about it like that, I said, because the framing device had to be something that I could root the audience in quickly and get them to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, you know. And then I was like, well, he sends a signal from the wormhole. Yeah. And, you know, it's a lot like Zeus talking to humanity or God talking to Moses. It's very similar. It's a similar framing device, you know? And when I met with Titan, one of the reasons why they had skipped over Benjamin and done Janeway was because they didn't know the approach that they wanted to do. They were like, well, he's in the wormhole. How are we going to do his autobiography? You know, and that first meeting I had with George Sanderson, who's a fantastic editor, and he was like, well, our idea is we'll do it and it'll be Jake's autobiography. He would have written the book Anselm that he was supposed to be writing in the show, and it'll be about Jake's biography. He'll be an older man, but it'll also be about his father. And I told him, I think that's a great idea. But my attitude was, hey, I don't have the gig yet, so I'm not missing out on anything. So I was like, look, I think that's a great idea, but I think we should do it. The other 4 books have been the captains in their voice. We can do Ben in his voice if he sends this signal to the station, you know? Yeah. And Ben was like, oh, tell me more about that. And I was like, you know, and I was like, you know, because it's not, and I told George, I said, I don't see it as an autobiography. I don't. I really don't. I still don't. It's a father talking to his son. And in that, it becomes autobiographical because the father is trying to explain life to his son. So that's how we get the autobiography, but that's not the intent of Ben has, right? Ben's just sending a message to his kid because he hasn't seen his kid. And the one thing that we didn't see in the last episode of DS9, he spoke to Cassidy, but he never speaks to Jake. And that pullout at the end of DS9 where Jake is looking out in the stars is heartbreaking, man.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I got to say something about that. I got to, you know, so the last three characters we see on Deep Space Nine is Nog walks into Kira's office, right? Kira walks Deep Space Nine, runs into Jake, and there's the pullout. So the first three characters we see in the book is Nog, Kira, and Jake.
Wow.
Nice.
So
I've said it a few times as we were reviewing the book. I love that this autobiography kind of completes that story, because I think that is kind of what we were missing is, you know, what happened with Jake and what happened with Cassidy and what happened with this. And then another kind of small thing I got out of Dream and Dreamer, and maybe I don't remember my exact references, but I think Jake had built a house in Kendra Province, which was what Ben's dream was when he built the little model on the table. That was the dream house. Yeah. And, you know, you're looking at, like, we never got to see a whole lot of Bajor and Ben actually living on Bajor, which was his overarching dream of the whole thing. So to see that finished out in Dream and Dreamer, and then now we can continue on with, like you say, we get that pull away from Jake, but he invested so much in Jake and we don't know what happens.
Right.
Like how,
right.
And,
you know,
the other part I loved about it is, like you said, it's a message to your son. And a lot of what I got out of this book was, man, who teaches a man to be a man as he's becoming a man? And if coming from a guy that had no father in his life, my aunt was that person, correct? She still, man or woman, she still can teach those lessons, but someone has to teach those lessons. And man, how do you follow up being a man behind Benjamin Sisko without advice from Benjamin Sisko? Like, I don't think anybody can give you those lessons that he. So I love that the fact that you frame that as a letter from father to son, and guiding Jake without his father physically being there. That was so awesome to me.
Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate the comments that both of you have given, you know, at going through chapter by chapter. And, you know, and I grew up in a single parent household. My dad skipped out when I was 10. And so it was important to me that if I'm writing a story where a father is giving messages to his son, that these are things that not only do I believe, but if anyone was to ever read them and be like, yeah, that's something that you would want a kid to hear. You know, I could never hope that someone, it's like out of my realm of understanding to hope that someone would be like, oh, I'm going to take from this book. But at least that they would be like, that's what I would want a father to say to a son, you know, to guide a kid the right way, you know. And even in the beginning of the book, you know, we get a little bit about Jake, where Jake is like, you know, everybody wants something about Benjamin Sisko. You know, Federation, Starfleet wants the captain back. You know, Bajor wants the emissary back. You know, he's like, I just want my dad. I just want my father, man. And I thought that was important because we haven't seen, like you said, we haven't seen Jake, or we don't know what's going on, you know. So I figured there would be a little bit of that going on. You know, where is he? Where isn't he? You know, where's the Sisko? And Jake doesn't care about any of that, man. And I know, like, the fans may want to hear and see certain things, but when I'm writing from the perspective of the characters. Jake don't care.
No, he doesn't.
And he never has on the show. He really hasn't cared about Starfleet. He doesn't, he does what he feels is right. And so I thought it would be fair and right for him to say, I just want my dad. And the only reason I'm putting this out there is because this is what came in the signal, and I'm trying to quiet all the noise and about what the signal was. This is what it was, so.
How easy was it for you to extrapolate on some of Benjamin's early life? And I know we have bits and pieces that we get from the show itself, but you basically had to create a whole world of backstory for the character that, you know, I think we knew very little about.
Yeah. There's nothing. There's nothing. Here's the problem, right? So I get the gig and I'm like, oh man, he mentions in one episode, he mentions that he has 2 brothers, and that's it after that. And then 7th season, we find out he has a sister, and then that's it. And I'm like, and not really anything about his childhood other than New Orleans and his father, you know, Creole, you know, Cisco's and Creole cooking. So I had to build it all, you know, and that scared me. But then I realized that's freeing because I can, you know, as long as I try and do the right thing, you know. So elements of it, honestly, I molded after my own life. There are certain things, you know, like I had both of my grandparents pass away back to back, you know, and that impacted me as a kid and as an adult. And I had this conversation, you know, there were no surprises with my editor, with George. I said, George, there are certain things I want to do that happened in my life, and I want to give them to Ben, not out of ego, because I think, you know, it's like, oh, he's a writer, he wants to put his life. I was like, it's not out of ego, but I think these things would really kind of help us all understand Benjamin Sisko, the man, you know, if I can do these things that have happened to me and give them to him. And he was like, oh, okay, that's cool. You know, I have an artificial hip that I've had replaced a few times. And I had to be 6 months in bed, couldn't get out of bed. And that drove me crazy. And my mom bought me model starships.
Wow.
Wow.
Which taught me a lot of patience, because when you can't get out of bed and you're like 16 and your hip is healing and you can't get out of bed and your mom brings you models to build and they're models of Star Trek starships.
Oh, wow.
You learn patience, right? And so I gave that to Ben.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You know, so little things like that, you know, but then I realized that to understand the man that he is, I wanted to talk about his grandparents, not just his parents, but his grandparents, you know, and this is also an opportunity to push forward Afrofuturism and the black family in the future, right? So then I can show elements of the black family and black women and just women and especially black women and push all that forward. So that's why I was like, oh man, I'm not just creating his family. I'm going back and, you know, creating his grandfather and grandmother and all that, you know. So yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry if I talk too much. I say this all the time.
No,
Sometimes I get to go in and I
man,
talk,
so okay.
and I think Clarence kind of had some plan of what. But anyway, it's funny that you say that. Like I never crossed my mind that the writer, you would be putting things in from your life because the things fit. Like, okay, we know Ben Sisko loved ships.
Right.
We know that he was basically an engineer at heart.
Right.
For him to, like, it just fit perfectly for me that he got hurt and he laid in bed and put together model starships. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. And in my head, I'm like, man, Mr. Attico must have found something from old writer's guide or something that said this. Like, it fits perfectly. Same thing with, you know, his grandparents passing away. Like, if you look at Ben through DS9, he carries himself as like someone that's learned a lot from loss in early life, right?
And death shakes him.
And so to see that, read that in the book that he lost his grandma, I was like, oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
There's also a lot why he still leans heavily on his dad now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and then to hear you say, well, but that's, again, I keep going on this. It's why I love Star Trek, right? Because it's so much related to life. You can take almost anybody and say, I see you in this episode, in this series, in this character, right? And it not only shows that person, their trials and tribulations, it also shows them, again, where the dream and where it can be. Mm-hmm. Anybody, right?
The human condition, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lie, it was a little trippy where things was like, oh, this would just fit really well because I can go from the accident to his mom bringing him the starships to him wanting to be an engineer. Because we already know in the show he wanted to be an engineer, but we don't know how he got there. And I was like, oh, I can line that up really well, you know? And just things just start to fall into place, because I think once you know storytelling, you know, the trick for me was like what not to put. You don't want to put everything, you know, of your whole life, right? You just want to serve the story and serve the characters, you know, and be honest with that, you know. And then I realized like elements like, you know, Ben not seeing that he can be a leader, but everyone around him seeing that, right? And he's like, you know, time and time in the book, people are like, you're the guy. And he's like, I'm not the guy, you know, but he's obviously the guy.
Yeah.
But he can't, and that's life, because there are things that we all have blind spots. So I try to write something that was authentic and truthful. We all have blind spots. We can't see stuff about ourselves, and then our friends would be like, oh, you do that thing, or our wives or mates, or, you know, we do that thing. It's like, do I really? Yeah, you do that thing, you know? That's Ben's thing. He didn't see that he was the leader, and then once he embraced it, look at what happens to him.
Right. So. And also that being things that he learned from his father in the kitchen and growing up around that type of environment.
Tying the tie in after his grandmother's death, you know. Yeah, that was a scene that was like, oh man, you know, am I going to do this? Am I going to write about tying a tie? I'm like, but it's more than tying a tie. You know, so yeah.
What led you to go with the, I'm going to use the word Luddite for that generation, the family being more Luddites than, you know, or just New Orleans in general of that time?
Well, thankfully, you know, see, this book is tricky because we see Benjamin Sisko, and he's in my opinion, a finished product, right? Mm-hmm. He's pretty put together as a character.
Right.
And one of the best balanced captains in Star Trek, right? So I'm like, well, how am I going to reverse engineer all this stuff, right? And go to the beginnings of all that, you know? And then I started looking at Joseph Sisko, and Joseph doesn't like, you know, replicated food. Joseph doesn't want to, you know, doesn't like beaming. He doesn't, you know, I was like, oh, you know, there's something there. And I was like, but you know what? I can pull that out even more, and I can have some commentary about, because in all the, not in all, but in a lot of the books and in most of the TV shows, we see them from the perspective of Starfleet. You know, we don't see a lot about what's happening on Earth in the 23rd, 24th centuries, right? I was like, here's an opportunity to talk about regular people living on Earth, you know, and what is that like, man, living in the 24th century? and the more research I did on New Orleans and Louisiana, and I've never been. And
really,
I've never been Louisiana, never been New Orleans, you know. But I would sit on like forums and read about people talking about, you know, their town, and I watch documentaries. I watched Treme on HBO, which was really helpful, believe it or not, which is really helpful. And just, you know, read a lot, and I was like, well, you know, from its history, it's been a service industry, food, music, culture. Why would they give that up in the future? Why would they be like, oh, okay, replicators are here, so we don't want to have gumbo. Oh, holodecks are here. Why do we don't need musicians anymore? That's not realistic. They're going to be like, we're in the future, but we still want to hold on to those things because that's our history, that's our past, that's who we are. And there are going to be people that aren't going to want to touch that technology, and that's Joseph Sisko. And then I was like, that's my lead-in, because then that's the Sisko family. You know, and then that opened up Earth for me, man, because then I could talk about things, and I could talk about culture and racism, and Joseph is still a product of 200. You know, it's been 200 years from like today, right, roughly. But Joseph Sisko, in a lot of ways, still has some of the trauma from racism. Yeah, you know, he's trying to protect that. He's trying to protect his family. He's like, we don't need to go to space. We need to keep our culture here. Yeah. And Ben is the first one that's like, I gotta go. I'll take all that with me. I won't forget who I am, but I gotta go. Right. You know, so.
Yes, I love that you did not shy away from being rooted in his culture and his father trying to instill that in him. One of my favorite parts of the book actually is when we go to the museum and
Remembrance centers.
these hollow recreations of these atrocities. And it brings a whole nother level of just, you're not going just to read a line on a plaque in the museum and look at a few pictures. Right. You can feel, and see with your own eyes the atrocities of the past. So I really love that element of the book.
Yeah, man. I figured, I was like, living in the world we're living in today, I was like, well, how are we ever going to get to what Gene Roddenberry wrote, right? How are we going to get to that, right? And even Gene Roddenberry, in his original writings of Star Trek, in the original series, World War III happens.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's only after that do we realize how effed up we were to each other.
Yeah.
And then the Vulcans come, and then we start to have big ideas, right? So even Gene Roddenberry is saying things got to go really bad before they get better, And taking like that line of thought from Gene Roddenberry, I was like, well, then there would have to be these remembrance centers, one in every major city where you could walk in, and if you walked into one in New Orleans, it would talk about war in regards to New Orleans, racism in regards to New Orleans, so that people don't start to forget, because this is what we're in the middle of now. People are like, these things didn't happen. This never happened. Or things were erased. And, yes, these things happened. Yeah. And you need remembrance centers so that people remember that these things happen, because if you forget how they happened, you're destined to repeat them, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. People often think it's an indictment of the current generation, but no, it's just keeping it in our mind so we don't make the same mistakes again. It's
There you go. Yeah.
imperative that we remember these things.
Yeah. And then I did Ruby Bridges because she's from New Orleans, and little girl, 8 years old, 10 years old, had to have armed guards to go to school because people are screaming at her because she's black, going into a white school, so you couldn't get any better than that. It's in New Orleans. And then Ben's attitude is like, that didn't happen. What are you talking about? Because he's from a different, he's a kid, right? And his father's like, yeah, that happened. And this is what it was like. And if I didn't put that in the book, I would have been ashamed of myself. Straight up. How could I not put that in the book?
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it wouldn't have fit. I mean, even in DS9, Sisko shows that. Like, Sisko on many occasions kind of reminds people that, hey, there was an issue that we can't forget. There's Earth wasn't always what you see now.
Right.
Earth got here because it went through this, and let me show you this. He never forgot that. And, as Star Trek does, it's never like on the nose. And we can talk about the new Trek, but we're not going to go there. But it's never on the nose, but it's enough to make you look at it and think about it. And I love the fact that in DS9, put that in your book, the same thing. Hey, don't forget this happened. Don't forget it happened. We don't have to live by it, but we have to remember it happened. It's like you said, or we repeat it, right? And so, and if you didn't put that in, it would have been a disservice to yourself and to the Sisko character in general.
Yeah, because now you can draw a straight line from that conversation he has in the book to his attitude on Deep Space Nine, and you could be like, oh, I get it now.
Right.
Before, it may have been a little hard for people to be like, well, he lives in a post-racial society. Why is he thinking these things? But now you understand why he's thinking these things. So.
I want to talk about shocking moments in the book, and I'm going to see if John has one. But I'm going to have to start with mine, which is the 18-wheeler in the transporter.
Sorry.
I was.
That's nuts, right? That's nuts.
It makes so much sense. This kid who doesn't really know a lot about technology, he sees this fancy, pretty thing. Oh, I can do this and this and this. And, oh, man, transport inhibitors suck. So,
okay.
Where did you come up with that crazy idea from?
When I write, sometimes I'm fortunate enough to have like dialogue or lines just come to me, And this line came to me. I was 10 years old before I realized I lived in the 24th century. And I was like, that's dope. That's a dope line, That says a lot. And I was like, well, how am I going to support that line? And then that had me think about creating the hotel. And then, you know, I was like, okay, well, it's a hotel and they're going to obviously have transporters. But even though, like, you know, the Sisko family doesn't have all this technology, they would still have it in the hotel. They would have to. They would have to have it in the hotel. But these aren't Starfleet transporters, right? So these are like, you know, the difference between like buying a commercial phone or buying something that the military uses is night and day, right? So it's not going to have all the safeguards, right? And he sees a transporter for the first time, and the people think about that, man. People literally appear in front of him that weren't there a couple seconds ago, and this kid has never seen this stuff before because he's been sheltered, right? So, you know, then the teenager at the front desk is like, "Oh, you want to see what transporters are all about?" So it's a prescription for disaster, right?
So good.
Well, I mean, it's like you think back when you were a kid and you bike and you jumped your first ramp, right? And you're like,
which
let's make that a little bigger.
Right? Well, how do you do that in the 24th century? This is what you do. So then he gets these ideas and he starts jumping off of stuff and jumping off of staircases, but it's, you know, not that big a deal. I can jump off of this thing, and also it's going back into his head of what his grandfather told him was to live life. But he's a kid, so he's taking that out of context, right? Nothing is on the nose, right? It's out of he's a kid. So he's trying to live life in his kid brain, you know. You know, and his father tells him, you know, once he's in the hospital, there's a difference between being entertained and being fulfilled, you know? Which was another way to get that lesson. But yeah, so then I figured 18-wheeler, what can you jump off of, you know? I figured there would be like things that couldn't be transported but had to be actually remote driven, you know, around the country or around, you know, places. And he jumps off of it and...
Oh, boy. Such a great moment. Flabbergasted.
What was shocking in the book for me, and I'm sure, Clarence, you're going to mention this at some point, so I'm sorry if I'm stepping on it. I never would have guessed Sisko to be a ladies' man. And he not necessarily, he wasn't, but he was. Like, he was accidentally. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Well, it took him a minute to get there, though, right? I mean,
he shot his shot, though. He shot his shot.
I mean, we see in DS9 the one episode when when there was Fenna there.
Right,
like, that was the first time I've actually seen Benjamin Sisko with a active love interest that he wanted to go after, right? That's right. Cassidy was more like thrown to him, like forced to him. But, you know, Fenna, I never saw that part of him. And I was like, you know, every man's going to go through that at one point. But now I'm reading your book and I'm like, oh, he's done this a few times.
His first girlfriend, kind of like his first girlfriend or thereabouts. Am I forgetting names? Zoe Beaumont. And he meets her, and that's great. You know, and he's about to go into Starfleet, and he meets her, and she's like, yeah, man, I want to be a dancer, and this isn't going to work because you're going to leave me, you know? So, and he's like, what? You know? And she's like, well, your passion is Starfleet. I can see that now. You know, I can see it now. You know? And then when he meets Tyler Scott, who is the captain from the last episode of first season of Next Gen, Conspiracy.
Yeah, Conspiracy,
Yeah, she's in there. And he meets her, and he's all in at that point, right? But she's like, no, I want to be a captain. Because he doesn't want to be a captain at that point. He wants to be an engineer. So she leaves him. So he's had like a switch of, you know, two things. You know, one leaves him because of Starfleet, and one leaves him because she wants to be a captain.
So what made you decide to put in the multiple love interest? It works because I think a lot of your book, like I said, it's not really an autobiography, but if for the reader, it's giving us a view of what made the Sisko we know in DS9 the Sisko. And it's reading like these failed love interests, I think, built upon that. But I mean, I'm just thinking I'm by no means a writer at all, but I'm just thinking if I'm writing something like this, what gave you the idea, like we're going to approach it with 2 or 3 different failed love interests? What was that?
2 things. One is I didn't want to just get to Jennifer. I wanted to lead up to Jennifer.
Okay.
Because it's a person's life, right? So you want to lead up to Jennifer, you know?
Yeah.
And then whenever I got lost or whenever I didn't know what I was going to do, I always came back to this is a father speaking to his son. So he's talking about love, and he's talking about, what it's like to love. And I think even at the beginning of that chapter, he talks about how Jake was dating a Dabo girl.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And he's like, look, I've had some loves in my life. Maybe you can learn some lessons from here, some of the loves that I've had, And so Ben is talking to Jake about the different type of loves, but we're getting the autobiographical part, So by the time he gets to Jennifer, he's had some real life under him by that point. So I think it feels right when they finally get together. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's especially important when you talk about the message to Jake, the message of love lost, the message of change that you have in the book as well. So I think it just feels right that so many of these events that happen in his life, like directly, are direct lessons for Jake to grow upon. So I really, really love that in the book as well. I wanted to pivot into maybe talking about how you weave in different characters, and maybe not so much in the era of when the show actually begins, but more so before that, because we get wind of Data, we get Pulaski, we get all these other characters that we kind of know and love from different shows that kind of make cameos in the book. Was that a mandate from the publisher, or was that just something that you felt fit with the story?
No, I was very fortunate. This is my first novel also. And I was very fortunate that Titan never gave me do this, don't do this, do that, don't do. The only thing was to pull back and not do so much as I did in this short story. But other than that, they were like, go for it. And I had to give them an outline, of course, before, and they had to approve that outline. And so I just put in characters that I was like, I would like to see these characters, and anytime I'm very fortunate to have written for Trek a few times now, and I don't know if it's ever going to be my last time. Could be, right? So I'm gonna write what I want to write. I mean, within that parameter, within those guidelines, And I love Data, so I've always wanted to write a Data, at least scene or story, right? And that scene when when he meets Data is Data next season 1 Data. It's not Data by the time we see him in the films or anything, but it's season 1 Data where he's still like, what, what's going on, and everybody always has this reaction to seeing an android, and I was like, well, a black dude would understand that, hey, he's just another cat. He's just another character. He's just another dude, And Data appreciated that. Data was like, yeah, thank you. I'm just, he's like, why are you not acting surprised? He says, Data, you're an android. What's the big deal?
Right. So. And it goes back to that upbringing that we talked about. And it just all ties in beautifully with, he is growing up, and I love that in the book that we see these different elements of the future slowly trickle in to Benjamin's life. So by the time he gets to this point, he's it's just like, that's kind of how I was raised,
right. Right. And we can from stuff and like Dax. Dax was a lot of fun to do. Curzon, because Curzon, we always heard that he was like this, dirty old man. So now I get to write that. That was fun, But then Dax is the one that tells him, gets real with him. He's like, a lot of people, man, they are just living to go to work and not working to live. What do you want to do with your life, man? You miss your family, then you need to be with your family, and of all people to tell him that, it's the party dude. Yeah. And we see that the party is a mask. It's a facade, right? So yeah. So wow. It was an opportunity to just say a lot of things that I wanted to say and to look at these characters. And, these characters are created from, a lot of them from, obviously Deep Space Nine are writers, and they built a really good stable of characters that I could build upon, So it's like taking the baton from them and moving a lot of this stuff forward was a lot of fun.
Jennifer, I know me and John debated this when we got to the particular Gilgo Beach scene.
Right.
Was it the rehashed? Was it the natural version of events, or was it the events that we saw in the show of how it played out. And you did it so expertly of tying in the dialogue to make it kind of ambiguous if it was a fresh run or like the rehashed run. So I was confused on that, but I thought it was just beautiful with how it worked because it was enough for me and John to fuss about like what we were actually.
No, that's great. I appreciate that, gentlemen. I wrote that, and I think that's the only scene I wrote where I actually watched. I wanted to make sure I got it right. Mm-hmm. And what I realized is like in the first episode of Deep Space Nine, when Kyle Parker is, he's in front of the orb,
yep.
Right? And he has that experience, right? I'm like, yeah, that happened, but that's a memory, right? And so memory isn't always 100%. You add stuff gets taken away. So I could play a little bit. Like, like in what I write, there's no hot sand on his feet, right? It was the hot sand that made him go to her.
Yeah,
that's on purpose, because I'm trying to show that it's a little bit different. What actually happened may be a little bit different than what he remembers. Because that's what we do in life, right? We don't remember. We're not androids, right? So everything's a little bit different than what's, but the dialogue is the same up until a point. And then we see that he came with his boy Cal,
Yeah.
and this girl that's really into him that he's just not feeling at all because he met Jennifer the night before, and
Yeah.
it's just like life, man. Sometimes there's always somebody that's into you and you're not into them, and then the person you're not into is not into you, and I was like, yeah, let's put that in because that feels like life. So.
And you paint this beautiful scene of Jennifer the night before at the party on the moon. And just the gravity and just jumping up and down and dancing way in the sky. And, I could see myself also being in awe of this beautiful lady.
Right? Wouldn't that be dope if we could go have a force field on the moon and you can have a party at 0 G or low G, and in the episode, she said, didn't we meet at George's party? And that's the only line about George and George's party. And I'm like, well, what can I do with that? I was like, okay, well, George is a DJ, has parties, but I can go even deeper. And George is the barber.
Yes.
On the Presidio, on Starfleet grounds, because you got all these different aliens, all different kinds of hair and fur. You tell me that somebody's not cutting all that?
Right.
Right?
Well, and we had a barber, I think, in TNG.
And we had a barber on Next Gen. See, somebody's not cutting on that, but in the Academy, of course they are. So is George, and it's it's a brother, and it's a black barbershop, and you sit in the barbershop and you can sit next to an admiral and there's no rank, and I think that's kind of cool, So yeah. So
and if you ever go to a black barbershop, they're all about a party anyway.
Right. So yeah. So these are how things came to me. I was like, ooh, George, what can I do with that? And it's about like looking and see how much mileage you can get out of something,
Yeah. And it's so natural for Ben to be like, hit George on the shoulder. Who's that?
Who's that, bro? Right. Who's that?
So well done. So I guess we can move on a little bit.
I got something I want to say real quick.
Okay.
I remember watching you guys, and I was laughing, right? Because there's those 3 scenes that break continuity. The scenes where the first one where Ben finds himself. And you guys were like, what is this? What is he doing? I don't get that.
I want more of this.
What's that about? So I was laughing because I'll just say, if you take those 3 scenes and you read them together, but independently of the whole book, it'll probably feel different because they represent the past, present, and future of Bajor.
Oh.
So
really?
Yeah.
That's what I'll be doing the next tomorrow. I'll have to do that.
Yeah, speaking of, I thought it was awesome too how you integrated Sarah into the story.
Oh yeah.
That's another trippiness of Ben Sisko's life. His life is so nuts, man. If you really think about it,
that's his mother, nuts. Right? It's really yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to think the person that's creating the story is in an insane asylum.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, that's another way to look at it, right? And if Ben is 50% prophet, right? Or 50% wormhole alien because of Sarah, then that means that Jake is
really
right?
Yeah.
So in that second scene, when Sarah and he's watching Jake's birth, who is she talking about? Is she talking about Ben?
Oh wow!
Because she's like, the Sisko has many tasks before him. So is she talking about Ben, or is she talking about Jake? Because these people are outside of linear time, so there's no A to B to C for them. They see it all at one.
I never considered Jake being a not demigod, but being.
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, he is. I mean, he's part prophet.
Yeah.
Oh,
genetically.
man, that's gonna hurt me.
Well, and he was also like the Power Wraiths were inside of him for a
They
little
chose
while.
him too, right?
So I mean, you would think you go back like they would choose someone easy to, like a normal person. If you're already somewhat a god, you have the capability of.
Right.
That's a possibility.
Which in your book, that's what happens to Jonathan. Is it Jonathan? The son?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I've been playing with those ideas for a while. Yeah.
So that means Jonathan also has that.
But Jonathan isn't in this thing because I figured it would be like a different. I figured Dreaming a Dream is its own like reality, and I couldn't connect it to the autobiography. He has a daughter in the autobiography.
Yeah.
So it's a little different.
Project Defiant. Well, we can go back and we could talk to his, drill sergeant, worst drill sergeant ever. And how, going back to those themes of togetherness and working together for a common goal that he kind of parlays to Jake.
Right.
And that inherent leadership that he had, that, like you said, he didn't even really realize he had.
Right.
I thought that was really beautiful with how we get to see him kind of flourish his engineering chops on this outpost. I thought that was wonderfully done. And then just thinking of and we talked about this a while, how this planet is kind of structured, this water planet kind of broke my brain as well.
Yes.
And then lessons from, disgruntled teacher's assistants or whatever.
Right, trying to kill you in the middle of the ocean. Never good, right?
Oh, God. And he had to swim all the way back.
He had to swim all the way back.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, man. A lot of it was me trying to figure out like how I could get the most out of the Defiant. And, in the show, we know that Ben was responsible for like the design, or partially responsible for the design of the Defiant. And I was like, man, this is an opportunity to talk about pain, and and so I was doing all of that, but I was like, I can take that and go even back further of how the name Defiant, where that came from, and just like one line in one episode where he was like, I went to Starbase 137 during the academy. It was one of the best times of my life. So I was like, well, what do I do with that? I was like, what do I do? And then I like I said, I love Next Gen, and the bridge of Next Gen has that wood paneling.
Yeah.
And I've always found that really beautiful design, and I was like, even when I was originally watching Next Gen, I was like, that wood can't just be wood. It just can't be wood. It has to be something special about that. And I was like, oh, what if it's like a wood from a special planet, and it has these trees under the ocean, and
yeah.
Then it starts to feel, it has to have some depth to it, and it feels. Yeah. So now when you look at Next Gen, you're like, oh, that wood is from, from that planet, from those trees, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's what I did, and then his chief engineer, The Rock. I was writing years ago, before I was even thinking about anything. I was writing like a Star Trek novel just to keep up on writing, and I created this character, John Davidius West, and so I pulled him from that, almost like a homage to myself, from because he was a fully formed character in that story.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, I could, and he fits. He's a hard ass, and he's like, hey, space is going to kill you people.
You gotta learn.
You gotta learn. And we're not going to learn on no, high-fangled technology. We're going to build an Egyptian barge from hand. And they're like, what? He's like, well, you can ring this bell. You can leave.
You know, I'll take the logical choice.
Right. And the Vulcan is like, I'm out. This is illogical. I'm out, you know? But it starts to show teamwork, you know, and he starts to, I think he starts to see, you know, even the other cadets are like, you the guy, man.
Right.
You the guy to lead us, you know? And then, of course, the barge is named, they name it Defiant, because you have to name a ship.
I absolutely loved how Defiant came back around for Benjamin when, you know, we've been decimated at Wolf 359 and this is his project, you know, being the engineer.
Right.
This is his project. We're bringing in Leah Browns. We're bringing in, is it Shelby?
Shelby, right?
His other character. And his friend from the
lieutenant from the, I can't remember his name, the Bolian, from his former ship.
Yes, bringing them all in, and we're gonna hammer it out, and you could tell how much making this project worked meant to him.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, he couldn't let go.
It could not let it go, and you know, there's a certain amount of heartbreak you get from just watching the very first episode of DS9. It's kind of hard to get past in a lot of ways, and I always go back to it, but Sisko's hell bent. He's hell bent on finding a solution to defeat the Borg. So. Yeah, I just love how they played out. And, you know, seeing him, another lesson for Jake, having to kind of just can the project at a certain point when it didn't work out until Miles O'Brien comes.
Until Miles O'Brien, right. A lot of that, I credit to Mr. Avery Brooks, man, and his incredible acting. Because that first episode is everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
All that pain, you know, all that pain was there, and I had to represent that pain. I was like, the Defiant is the way to represent that pain. And, you know, everybody comes together to help, but then they start to peel off of the Defiant project. And it's like, let it go, man. And he's like, I'm not letting this go. I'm not letting this go. You know, and he actually gets reassigned because he won't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
So, Mr. Attico, I think we could talk to you all day about this book. I'm sure we could go for another hour or so, but I want to respect your time. I really appreciate you being here. I know that you have your own podcast, Soul of the Story.
Yes.
If you want to talk about that real quick, and maybe you can tell us how you got involved with the Syfy Sisters.
Oh, yeah, that's a great story. I love the Syfy Sisters. I go often to a convention, a shore leave convention, and I met the Syfy Sisters a few years back, and they were actually looking for me, which is really cool, you know. And they just really, Syfy Sisters have their own presence online. They have their show, which is a phenomenal show, and they have guests not only in Star Trek universe, but they've branched out. They've interviewed. They just had their 100th episode. I think this month. It just came out this month.
Oh wow!
And I've always wanted to do a podcast, and but it had to be the right thing at the right time, you know. And then the idea came up of, we started having discussions. It was like, well, maybe I could do something under Syfy Sisters Inc. umbrella. And they were like, and the energy felt right. You know, when you meet someone and it feels right, and it just, and it felt right. And then I came up with the name. And the idea of Soul of the Story is that I have conversations with established artists, not just writers. But so far we've had a painter, we've had musicians, actors. Celia Rose Gooding plays Uhura, Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. You know, been thankful to have her. The Nah visitor, Kira Nervise herself. You know,
wow.
It's been incredible. And so I want to have discussions about craft and story from these established individuals and artists from their perspective. You know, and I'll say here that next week I'm going to have the first writers roundtable, which is going to be interesting, with 4 generations of Star Trek literature writers, including myself. So that should be a lot of fun.
Awesome. And
we'll be talking craft and see how that goes. So it's been a wonderful. I'm blessed that people enjoy it and like it, and I'll keep doing it as long as they will have me.
So what's next in the writing sphere for you? Do you have anything planned, or are you you know?
Yeah. No, I'm working on some stuff that I can't talk about.
Okay.
Which is fun, which is great.
Star Trek related?
Working on some stuff that I can't talk about.
We need you in a writer's room, man. That's what we need you. We need you.
I wouldn't
in the
mind
writer's-
that. I wouldn't mind that. And I'm working towards my own material. I've got 2 novels that I'm working on. I've outlined, and a comic that I want to do. So
wow.
Working on some stuff.
Awesome.
And hopefully we can get the Dream and the Dream made into a movie. That's
Yes.
so great.
From your lips, right, to Paramount's ears, right? Why not, right? You know,
Yes.
We
So
should.
good.
Man, you
and
build
so Rob
such a...
Lofton is at the right age, man. He's ready to go. So he's a
Yes.
great individual. So yeah.
And you've already built the story for it. Like they don't need any more creative. Like we need the money and the production studio, and let's do it.
Cool. Well, Derek, it's amazing to finally have you on the show.
Absolutely.
And we can't
Thank you.
wait to read whatever you have coming out next. And we're going to stay locked into Soul of the Story as well. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Clarence
Thank you,
Johnson.
sir.
I appreciate the both of you immensely for what you've done over the last year, the time it took and the patience it took to do it. And I'm really excited you both had a good time doing it. And I'm enjoying, beyond that, your show. And I watch your show. So I enjoy watching your clips and when you do podcasts and shows, not just them talking about me, because who wants to hear about themselves all the time? You know? So I enjoy your show, and I'm looking forward to what you both do next as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Discussing Network. Find out more at discussingnetwork.com.
Can I say that like shut up Wesley? I can just go shut up Clarence?